Welcome, everyone, to our podcast on modernization. I'm really excited about this topic. I'm Thomas Blood. I'm a modernization strategist at AWS, and I have with me Matthias Patzak. Matthias, what do you do?
Hi, I'm Matthias. I'm an executive in residence at AWS.
And we're going to talk about the modernization of applications. What does that mean? Completely rebuilding core applications, but also in the context of what does that mean for the organization, the culture, the structure, and what kinds of tools are we talking about? So let's start with the 7 R's, Matthias. Can you shed a little bit of light about what we mean by 7 R's?
Yeah, the 7 R's are super important because at least when I talk to customers, and I'm not sure how it's in your conversation, but not everyone really understands what we mean with migration, what we mean with modernization, and some people are being a bit confused. And Gartner came up with the 7R framework. So the 7 ways going in the cloud, probably 10, 12 years ago. And from my perspective, they're still super valid because there are different ways on migrating or modernizing in the cloud. The first 2 are relocating and rehosting, and this is what is usually called lift and shift. So This is where you take a workload, put them in the cloud, and you run them mainly as they are in your current data center. Then we have the third R, which is repurchase. So for some application, you might just decide to procure a software as a service software or any other piece of software and do not migrate or modernize this application. And then we have 2 more R's. One is refactor. This is what we are going to talk about today. This is really refactor, rewriting core applications from scratch with a lot of risks, with a lot of benefits. So the second modernization R is replatforming, and replatform meaning you're exchanging certain parts of an application, like a database or containerization of an application. This is not a full modernization, so you have a more modernized application, but for example, you're not modernizing your processes or your organization with it. And then the 2 remaining R's are retire and remain. For some applications, your current data center setup might be the right place for the time being, because you anyhow can't migrate or modernize all of your applications at once. And then we have retire. Some of the applications, it's just time to sundown.
What's really interesting on retire is when we do this with large organizations, we always find 5%. Or so?
I had 20 in my mind, but I might
exaggerate. Well, I'm being very generous here. At least 5, I'd say.
Yeah.
5% of applications that really should be retired. They're just sitting there. In some cases, we've had situations where we asked for the owner of that application and nobody knows who it is.
Yeah.
And the IT team has been maintaining this thing, patching it, securing it, and it's actually not driving any value whatsoever.
Or even not patching it anymore. So I've seen applications still running on Windows 2000 servers and haven't been patched for ages.
Yeah.
But still, the applications are up and running because you never know.
Exactly. So this retire thing is an important thing, and it's not just important in the 7 R's. We'll come to this later when we talk about the refactor as well. So maybe we'll start off with a recap of the journey that you took when you thought about migration, modernization, and let's focus on the refactor piece of it. But how did you go about this, and what led you to that point?
I used to be CTO of AutoScout24. We had a monolithic application based on ASP.NET. We had a large Oracle cluster, 2 data centers that we owned by ourselves. And when we went on Microsoft conferences, because we had a bit of an unusual technology stack for internet companies in Europe at this point in time, we got the largest stages because we run a large European internet platform on Microsoft technologies. But we got a new CEO in 2013, 2014. This guy already had cloud experience, and he asked me two questions. And from my perspective, still, these were the most strategically questions I was ever asked. Okay. The first one was, Matthias, do you attract talent?
Okay.
And from my perspective, we did attract talent because we had not a real microservice architecture, but we had micro monoliths in place. We were releasing 12 times a day. We had proper test-driven design, domain-driven design. So we were really good. But then he asked me a second question in the same meeting. And the second question was, how does a 21st century tech stack look like? No. And after he asked me these two questions and 8 minutes in my 30-minute slot with him, the meeting was over. So it was pretty clear, okay, there is some homework to do. And I realized that we hired for attitude, not for skill, as you should do. But nevertheless, when we hired someone in our organization that were a great fit into our culture, but then we had to train these people how to build and run a large-scale internet platform. Mm-hmm. And this was the main reason. Do you attract talent on a 21st century tech stack? That we decided to modernize, so rewrite everything from scratch in our company. So from these monoliths to microservice, from ASP.NET to Scala, from on-premise data centers and Oracle to cloud-native AWS services.
I did something similar at Experian Consumer Services, and for us the journey was a little different. We actually wrote an unsolicited proposal internally in the business and said, we noticed that there are the following problems, right? So technical debt, time to market is relatively slow, a proliferation of products that were not really brand integrated as well as they should be, right? So there was an opportunity there. User experience questions, maintainability, and innovation. Those were sort of and cost, but that was sort of not the most important one. So we put together a proposal and we said, look, we can actually do something better across all of these dimensions for the business if we rethink how we build things. And so we also went to a monolith, from a monolith to a microservices architecture.
So you got buy-in from your board?
I did.
Because most of the organization don't.
No, we took it to the board, we took it to the CEO. We basically said, and we kind of framed it a bit as a bet. We said, look, give us the A team. We're going to pull out some really good people, 5 or 6, 7 people. We're going to go off-site because I didn't want to have the constant conversation and explaining what I have to do, what we're doing. I wanted to be a little bit isolated. And the bet was we would build something in 90 days that we couldn't do today.
Wow.
It's very aggressive, right? But I figured if we do this and we pull it off, then everyone's going to cheer us along. And if not, then it was a really good experiment. We learned something. We try something else, right? So it was an experiment. It was a calculated risk. And, the CEO went along with it and said, okay, let's do this.
Very unusual.
I know. So it's an interesting approach. Yeah. So consider it, again, experiment. We love experiments in AWS and Amazon. So if you can set up an experiment, try it.
Yeah.
And if not, well, you learn something. But we learned a great deal, and we went really fast. And we did deliver something that was of value. It wasn't really production yet. But we got the buy-in from the company, from the business units, from the CEO. It's not just the CEO, right? You have to bring the whole business along on this journey. Yeah. And with that buy-in, we were able to then go as fast as we possibly could. So it became really clear when we went on this journey that this was not just a technology challenge. We also had to rethink about how do we organize ourselves, all the way down to how does the CFO think about reporting data that comes out of these systems? How did the CFO present this to the marketplace? So you had probably similar experiences. What did you think about organizational change in the context of modernization?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's really clear that if you change the architecture in a modern architecture pattern, and this is microservice architectures, so architecture which is loosely coupled and optimizes for high innovation, high speed, high throughput, you also need to change your organizational setup. So you also need to have a loosely coupled organization with small and nimble teams that are optimized for having ownership of their part and piece of the product. They need to be able and empowered to drive innovation of the part. And this is where most of the organization also fails. So you cannot just rewrite your application and say, now we have a clean code, we have good quality, we have maybe a loosely coupled microservice architecture if your organization does not fit the architecture. Plus, on the midterm, based on Converse law, and maybe we need to then explain Converse law, but if you have a certain setup in your organization, finally your architecture will mirror, and this is Converse law, the organizational setup. So if at the beginning you create a new loosely coupled microservice architecture, but you don't have the corresponding organization, your new shiny architecture will finally become a new monolith.
Yes.
And this is why you also have to adapt your organization plus your processes. Because if you have a new application, but you still release once a month or once a quarter with manual testing, and all the integration and deployment is done by an external contractor, you won't be faster. So you got a new car, but
You don't know how to drive it.
yes.
Exactly.
And this is why, from a modernization perspective, it's always people, process, and technology. And this is what makes these projects even more risky for organization, because it's not just, we can order a new system. So we ask a system integrator, hey, can you rewrite our monolith? Can you rewrite our mainframe? But it's also about, we have to reskill, upskill our people from a technology perspective, from a cultural perspective, and from a way of working perspective.
Yeah, and I realized this fairly early on, that this was going to become difficult. So I looked for allies in the organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was within the IT organization, of course. So I won over the chief information security officer, the CISO, because I said we could do better security if we think about this way. So I got that ally on board. And then, importantly, I got the VP of HR on board. I went to her and I said, we're going to rethink everything, including how do we train people, how do we upskill people, how do we manage people, what are the titles of people in the organization, because that could also change. Doesn't have to, but we took the opportunity. And then how do you embed an innovation culture in the company from the product teams on down? And that turned out to be a really rewarding experience to bring the HR leadership along for the journey right from the beginning. Because ultimately, the HR people are the ones who are responsible to make sure that people come along on the journey. So just maybe on this people thing, how do you bring people on this journey in the IT side of the house? What's your experience there?
It's easy and it's hard at the same time. It depends how you approach this change management approach. How I did it and what I observe with most of the customers I work with, as a leader, you believe you explain your decision, maybe you involve all the people of some of the people in the decision making, what is the future cloud provider, what is the future architecture setup, how do we call our new job roles. So we also changed the job titles. But the expectation is that after you went through this explanation and decision-making process, everyone is on board and everyone is very excited. But this never happens, because in every organization, every population, you have this distribution of innovators, early adapters, early majority, the late majority, and the laggards.
From crossing the chasm.
Yeah. And whatever you do, the laggards, they won't follow.
Right.
And you can do whatever you want, they never will be on the bus.
And it's not a small number.
It's not a small number. And what I see and what I did at the beginning and what I see with a lot of customers, they try for weeks, months, years, forever to convince everyone. And I've seen customer organizations who didn't start modernization because they believed, okay, not everyone is on the board. And for me personally, it became much more easier when I realized, okay, I don't need to have everyone on board or on the bus at the first months of this modernization. So I just need to have the innovators and the early adapters, and they are on board anyhow.
Because they want to, they're hungry.
They want to. So just start with them. The question is then what to do with the early and with the late majority. But for these large modernization projects we are talking about, so the core applications of insurance company, of a bank, these are not projects that are finished in 3 or 4 months. So it will be 2 or 3 years. So anyhow, you need to have people on your old core legacy system, the important system, which maintain people that maintain the system.
Yeah.
And this is the place for the late majority and the laggards, at least for a while. And this is how you then onboard month by month, quarter by quarter, or sprint by sprint, more people on the modernization project. And this is how you also manage the reskilling. I see a lot of customers then trying to reskill everyone in a single quarter, even if they know that some of the people will just be on the project on a 3-year
Eventually.
perspective. Yes.
And they forget.
They forget.
Yeah. Yeah, I tackled this also in a more evolutionary approach. So I created the first team. You start with the first team, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously you want to do something that's exciting, that gets the company behind you and rallies for you, hopefully. And once that team was baked and they were starting to deliver production-ready software, then I brought in additional people into that team. So I added people to the team. And so rather than training each individual person, the team itself, the team dynamic almost taught the newcomers in that team. Yeah. Right? And eventually the team got too big, because we're talking about 2 pizza teams here, so 7 to 9 people. Eventually it got too big, and then I just split the team.
Yeah,
right?
Did the same.
Yeah, we call that mitosis.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can scale that. And we talked about this earlier. You talked about how you can then build your ramp and think about the cost and the structure around it. Talk a little bit about what you were telling me earlier.
Yeah. So actually, you can, and I've seen this, that some organizations try to just order a new system. So you can ask a system integrator, can you please rewrite our core insurance applications? And they can do. Mm-hmm. But because it's your core system, your organization, your team, your people need to own this system. So eventually, you need to onboard your people on this new system, the new business processes, the new way of working. And you can't do it in a big bang, everyone moves now. So you have to do it gradually. And this is how you can apply a mechanism where you gradually ramp up teams on the new application. And this works very well in reducing risk, helping to estimate the cost, and overall increasing the success of the projects. And the mechanism is, as you did it in your organization, you start with 1, 2, or 3 teams in a bootstrapping phase. And the bootstrapping phase, the intent of the bootstrapping phase is just to create the architecture by putting pieces of software into production. So your first microservices. So you probably have 1 or 2 teams creating the first use cases, the most risky from a technical perspective, and the ones with the highest business value. And then you have 1 or 2 teams creating the infrastructure, the developer experience, the first version of the CI/CD pipeline. So don't boil the ocean in this bootstrapping phase, but it's just to enabling the organization for the next phase, which is then scaling. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams. After a quarter, they successfully bootstrapped your architecture, your development environment, and then you split each team, so maybe half of the teams, and put more people in. Mm-hmm. And what I would recommend is not just internal people, because you need people from the outside as well.
With the new ideas and the way of thinking.
Yes, and people with experience. We've done it before.
Yeah.
So each of your team is a combination of internal people. So these are the experts in knowing the business process, the business challenge, knowing the users. And then you bring people in, outside consultants, AWS ProServe, who know the technology, who know the ways of working. And this is then training on the job.
Yeah.
So for maybe 3 months, your people are being trained by the externals. And then after 3 months, you split again. And with this mechanism, it's very easy to manage and calculate the speed of this ramp-up phase. So maybe you have 500 people in your application, and you can calculate how long it takes to make them productive. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, depending on your reskilling and upskilling.
And the complexity of
on the complexity. And then how often you split. And if you split every team every quarter, everyone will be unhappy because they are constantly changing teams and they are constantly training. But you can decide with every cadence, every quarter, you just split half of your teams. So you have half of your teams delivering productive code, features into productive, and the rest of the teams, the ones you split, the purpose of these teams is not delivering business value, it's ramping up the team. And from my perspective, it's super important that you have teams from the beginning that showcase that the new technology, the new ways of working actually deliver business value, and on all the other promises or estimations you did at the beginning when you decided for this project.
Yeah, and before we stop here, you mentioned earlier that you were also simulating the cost, which I thought was super interesting because I didn't do that and I wish I had. So maybe share a little bit about that story because I think it's really interesting.
So the traditional way on estimating cost for these modernization projects is you ask someone in your organization, or mostly it's an external consultancy on doing an analysis of the features of the core legacy application, document everything. Usually it takes a year or two. Then you ask internal and external experts to estimate it. 80% of the projects are dead afterwards because the estimates are so high because a lot of risk estimates are put on top of it. And you can't really estimate based on this feature set because you don't know the actual productivity. So you can't really estimate. But you can apply a different way on estimation. This is a capacity-based estimation. So you provide a budget for this modernization project, and the budget is the number of teams that you want to modernize this application. And you start with a single team. So the cost for the first months are the cost of these teams. Your internal people plus the external people.
And a little bit of infrastructure.
And the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yes, and training cost. But mainly it's the effort, the manpower. And then you have an Excel sheet where you say, okay, we are going to split the first team after 3 months and then every other teams every other 3 months. And then you can simulate the ramp-up phase of this project. And you also have the cost aligned with the scaling mechanism. And then very early on, when you have productive teams that deliver features, you also know how long does it take to deliver feature. And this is where you then can start estimating. So we just estimated cost, and now you can estimate time. And I would totally recommend to estimate this differently. And the estimation of the time should not be an estimation, so no estimates, but it should be a forecast.
Right.
So you know how long it took the first teams to deliver features, and now you apply a Monte Carlo simulation and you take the list of the features, your backlog, and then you just forecast how long does it take.
There's an important piece on the list of features. And, we talked about this earlier. A lot of times, you're not going to transform or rebuild every feature that your old application had. Because sometimes those features are completely unnecessary. So there's lots of studies on this as well, where this feature creep comes about because product owners or product managers have to show progress, so they invent something new that the customer may want. A lot of times it's not done with appropriate customer testing, and then you wind up with a whole bunch of features in your application or in your system that are actually not generating value.
Yep.
So in a way, when you're in this refactor moment, you have an opportunity to reset and rethink, okay, first of all, what do I prioritize? Because you already know what the value of the old feature set is. But also, is there something I can just cull? Just like we did with the overall 7 Rs, is there something I can retire from the feature set? And I think that's a huge opportunity and often a missed opportunity in these projects. So what was your experience with that one?
So from my experience, these modernization projects are very risky. So they can fail from a technical perspective, or they can just fail because the CFO pulls the plugs after 2 or 3 years. Because the CFO or the CEO, they don't see the benefit.
Or the market changes.
Whoever.
Yeah.
But they don't see the benefit. And one of the most common errors I see with of organizations modernizing their application is they try to do it most efficient. So They have their estimated backlogs of 6,000 features. Then they work through the dependencies, try to work through the dependencies, and then they try to find the most efficient part, mostly then creating some foundation first, master data, and then very late on, they deliver the business value. And this is not how you can approach such a project. So you need to deliver the most important things first. And most important means highest business value and highest technical risk. Because you have to prove from the very beginning that your new ways of working, the new technology, all the money you spend, and during the time where you modernize and you take capacity away from your legacy application, you also slow down the legacy application, that all this effort is worth it. So you really need to deliver business value
right away.
Right away. And actually, this is why you have to prioritize your backlog by business value and technical risk. But the question is, what is business value? How do you really prove the new feature delivers business value? Mm-hmm. For most of the organization, they are just happy if the new checkout page, the new login page, the new registration piece is live. But this is not how digital native organizations work. Digital native organizations are really keen on changing KPIs. And this is my second advice after prioritizing by business value and technical risk is you can somehow cheat in this modernization projects. Because most of the companies, they believe they need to deliver these 6,000 features. They don't have to. What business is expecting is more revenue, more customers,
lower cost, faster, cheaper. And so you can make KPIs the major success metric of such a modernization project. In one of the modernizations I led, we had 3 main KPIs. Revenue per session, so it was an e-commerce site. It was conversion rate, and it was basket size of this e-commerce shop. And so we started to migrate the most important page at first. It was a product detail page. We put it live after a month for traffic that we then bought on social commerce. And with this 10% of the original traffic, we optimized this product detail page purely from a conversion rate perspective. And when the conversion rate was better than the original page, we exchanged the original page with the new conversion rate optimized page and had a better conversion rate. And so after 9 months, we had a system, just 60% of the features, but 32% higher conversion rate, leading to 80% more revenue because the basket size was lower. And yes, a lot of people in the organization were not happy with getting just 60% of the features, and essential features were missing. So payment methods, for example, really important features were missing. But if you deliver 80% more revenue on an e-commerce site, job done, basically.
Yes.
And then,
so the board,
and you just iterate on the rest.
So for the board, it was a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer to put this system live. And then we had a system live. We got we got more revenue. The ROI of the project was after a few months there. So we had earned a lot of trust in this new way of working, the new architecture. So it was much, much more simpler going live after 9 months than it would have taken us 2 years to deliver everything.
Before we get into the application itself and how to think about that, I think this thing about this KPI, metric-driven, data-driven approach is super important, and maybe we should double-click on that for a moment again. So what you did is you did 10% of live traffic to optimize the functions, and then once they were satisfactorily optimized, you then added more and more traffic, 50%, and then you cut over. In a way, this is like A/B testing.
It's like A/B testing, exactly.
Yeah. And so we know how to do this. We just need to do it in this process of modernization where you can compare one against the other, and the better one wins, right?
Yes.
And if you're optimizing, the whole purpose is optimize. You want to optimize because you want to transform the architecture. We're optimizing for business.
Yes.
Right? And sometimes we forget that as engineers.
Yes. And this is one of the reasons why modernization projects take a lot of time, because it takes the stakeholders a lot of time to make a decision. which feature to prioritize, which feature you take as it is, which feature to change and how to change. And it's all based on guessworks, or I've been to a customer yesterday's, all customers want whatever. But if you apply this A/B testing thinking and you put an experiment in front of just 1, 2, or 5% of your customer base, and then you optimize based on anecdotes and data of these customer experiments, you can immediately increase the business value that a modernized application delivers based on, and this is how you reduce all the discussions, based on customer anecdotes and customer data. And this is one of the reasons how you can reduce the time to market of these modernized applications.
So what we've talked about so far was really web-based applications. And I want to make sure that we also address that these patterns in this conversation really applies to everything.
Yeah.
And so maybe let's talk about the thing that is perceived to be extremely risky, which are mainframes. Been around for decades, have lots of core business value embedded in them that drive vast amounts of business, whether that's insurance or earth system science or automotive. It's really everywhere. So how do we think about this with something like a mainframe? How do we think about the beginnings of modernizing the mainframe applications?
So you're right. So we talked based on our background, and it's web environments, and maybe in web environments it's a bit easier. But nevertheless, the same principles that you can apply and should apply for modernizing legacy applications are the ones you should apply for the mainframes as well. So gradually modernizing and rewriting the most important from a business value perspective features and the technical risky ones. The issue with mainframes is that the coupling is so high, and the skill gap from a technology perspective of the workforce, what they currently know and what they need to know in the future is larger. So you need to put much more effort in the reskilling. Change management is tougher. You need to have more external experts because the re- and upskilling gap is so wide. But the same principles can apply. What is important is, what I see sometimes with customers is that they take the easy way and they just abstract away the front end.
Yeah.
So they keep the business logic, then they improve the usability, mostly for internal users, because mainframes are usually not end user facing in a B2C or B2B sense, but it's used by internal people. So they abstract away the front end. You get a new shiny front end, but the actual business logic hasn't changed. So the organization is not faster. Productivity isn't higher. The quality isn't really better. And you can't, and this is why most of the mainframes being modernized, finally, you're not more innovative. It just looks like a new front end. But if you look at the main KPIs, throughput, cycle time, innovation, cost, nothing changes. And this is why it might be an intermediate step to modernize a front end. But finally, you have to modernize and completely rewrite mainframes. But luckily, now with generative AI, it's getting easier. So you can shorten the timeline and you can reduce the risk.
Yeah, just on that point, one of the challenges with mainframes and many other applications is that the business logic was written in languages that are no longer used, right? Like, say, COBOL, for example, or not used broadly, let's say. So it's really hard to understand what was the original intent of that application. How does it work? And documentation, we all know how engineers love to do documentation, being facetious. So the gap, the lack of documentation, or the drift between the original documentation and how that application has evolved over time could be vast, right? And so people don't actually know how these things work anymore. We had a guy, I worked for the US government a long, long time ago, and we had a guy who was really, really, really smart about one part of the application. And that one person was mission critical. If that person had left or retired, the whole thing would have come to an end, right? So there's risk in these applications that nobody really understands. So maybe let's untangle a little bit how to get at that business logic. How do we get it out? What are the mechanisms that we can talk about here?
So there's not a single size fits all solution. Actually, it comes down to you need to apply a strangler fig pattern. So you need to choose one use case, one business process, and then analyze and refactor this one. So you need to take this business logic out, and then in the new modernized technology, rewrite it and carefully compare the results of the new business process with the result of the old business process. And it's super important that you involve, so software is peopleware, so that you involve people, so that you involve the engineers of the old application plus the users of the old application. And then, because it's a lot of effort, so mainframes have millions of lines of codes. Now with generative AI and AWS has a service for it, it's AWS Transform. It's a generative AI service that understands programming language and natural language. It helps you to analyze and document the current business logic of your mainframes. Nevertheless, I would just take this as a hint or an indication on how the actual business logic is. You still need to re-engineer the business logic also for the future needs, because you just don't want to rewrite the old business logic in all cases one by one.
Exactly.
Sometimes you want to.
Well, one of the things I've seen in this new Gen AI-enabled version of modernization, which is really exciting, is Gen AI can analyze the code much faster than humans can.
Definitely, yeah.
Right? And understand what it's doing. So what are the data dependencies? What are the system dependencies on other systems? And model those and describe those and actually create the missing documentation sort of after the fact, including the business logic. And once you have that documentation, then you can go back to the business, the engineers, the experts, and review that business logic and that documentation and say, is this right?
Yeah.
And also you can go back to the business and say, is this still fit for purpose? Or do we want to rethink or tweak something here? And once you've done that and you've cleaned up your documentation for the system, then you can again use other Gen AI tools to start to prescribe or define the roadmap to this modernization. So this is really exciting stuff. So,
or even prototyping.
So
you can take the documentation and bring this to the user, or you use different generative AI tools and let them create a prototype of the new system. I would not yet use generative AI to fully generate the code for the new productive mission-critical application, but I would definitely use generative AI to take the documentation that was used by AWS Transform or a different generative AI tool, and then create prototypes of the new workflows so that you can test the user flow, the usability, the business logic. You can generate test data. You can generate test cases. So there's a lot of things that you can generate that help users to understand how the actually new system is going to look like, how it's going to work, and what the results will be of the business process. And this is why what we have seen with customers, and there's also a study by McKinsey, that you can reduce in these phases of the projects the time by around 50%. And this is huge.
This is significant, yeah. Yeah, I've seen studies, sometimes 4xing the time to develop to refactor things. Super exciting, because part of the reason organizations have resisted or delayed, let's say, modernization is exactly that upfront investment, that time in a risky environment.
Yeah.
Right? Do you really want to spend a year or two rebuilding things, knowing that the market might change under you? Right. So, but if you can do it fast and you can prototype and you can experiment, that changes the game entirely.
Yeah.
And now I can actually make sure that it's still fit for purpose and drive the business outcomes I want.
Yeah. And it also helps de-risking from the perspective that you should avoid big bang releases at all costs. But this is what I see a lot, because the customers then have their dependency graphs and they believe they need to have everything ready. But this is very risky, because you're going to encounter failures just at the end of the project. You need to bring the new modernized application use case by use case in front of the user as early as possible, as prototypes based off generative AI, but also very, very early on as productive code.
Yeah.
So, and this is why my recommendation is when I talk to customers, they should start building from an infrastructure perspective the productive environment first, have this ready, then let your bootstrapping team ship the first use cases into production in the first or second month, being able to really have it in production with a proper CI/CD pipeline, with backup, with observability, whatever you need, and then start working backwards from this productivity environment with whatever test environment and staging environment you need. But still, a lot of organizations, they start building with the dev environment, the QA environment, the performance testing environment, and finally, after 8, 9, 10, 15 months, they start with setting up the productive environment.
Right.
You should definitely work.
The added benefit of doing it that way is when you're in production, you learn things that you don't learn anywhere else, right? About behavior, customer behavior, system behavior, faults that maybe you didn't think of, just the edge cases, let's say, especially when you then start to scale up, right? And so going to production very quickly with the piece that you've already refactored is an essential component of this modernization journey. And let's go back just for a moment to the strangler pattern, because I think that is super interesting. So the idea behind the strangler pattern is that the presentation layer pretty much stays the same unless you want to tweak something, but generally it's the same. So transparent to the end user, you're starting to pull out things from the legacy system, you're rebuilding them in production, and once those are done and solid, then you go after the next bit from the old system. And over time, you're shifting the things that are critical to the business so that you can innovate and you can drive faster products to market. And then you might have a residual thing left at the very end that maybe you cannot move because it's too complicated or some kind of a system dependency, or you don't need it and you can just turn it off. That's why I'm a huge fan of the strangler pattern. It gives you a way to kind of grow into this modernization effort instead of, like you said, a big bang effort, which we know doesn't always work that well.
And if you are through the migration and probably have migrated 60% of your features and delivered the most important stuff already, you might recognize that the last 40, 30% of the unimportant features are not really worth migrating. So you might just shut down certain features and repurchase software as a service software for these use cases, or you might keep then 20% of the features in the mainframe or in the old monolithic application for another 2, 3, or 4 years.
Yeah.
So, and this is what I see with a lot of customers. Then at the beginning, they thought they need to modernize and migrate all of the features. But then after 2 or 3 years, they realize, okay, they migrated the most important stuff and it's good enough. And this is how you then also can reduce the cost of these modernization projects.
Yeah. So I have to say, this conversation gives me a lot of hope because modernization, because of the riskiness and the cost and the uncertainty, has been a really, really hard row for lots of companies. But now that we look at this generative AI space that's emerging, it's super exciting. And so, maybe we touched on it earlier, but maybe just talk a little bit about like AWS Transform and how and what that does for our customers.
Yeah. So you're right. Modernization projects were really risky, really costly, and this is why a lot of organizations shied away for a long period of time. And this is what I see, the gap between customers that are able to innovate and organizations that are not is widening. And now with generative AI, some organizations can now catch up.
Yeah.
Because tools like, and this is why I'm really, really like AWS Transform, they help you, to analyze all the business logic. So AWS Transform is a service, it is able to analyze .NET applications, mainframes, which is really the hard part, and it helps you to analyze VMware. So it provides you documentation about what's going on in your application. And this documentation then reduces by, as we saw with customers already, by around 50% time in this phase. And then AWS Transform also can generate code. So it helps your staff that you're going to onboard on the new teams, on the new technologies, on the new ways of working to create the first increments, so to say, of the new technology and the new microservices. And then based on this, with your external advisors and your internal business process expert, you can then really faster create the new business logic and the new application.
Yeah, that's super exciting. These tools are amazing, and we have a new tool in our toolbox. It's called Cairo. Maybe share a little bit about what Cairo can do.
Yeah, Cairo is really cool. I also play around with it a bit. Cairo is our agentic IDE. So it's not just an IDE that helps you to complete some code or everything, but it changes software development fundamentally, because you start with a prompt. So you intend what you want to do, and it's not generating code right now like other tools, but then it creates a spec for you. So Cairo is spec-driven IDE. You come with your prompt, you tell him what you want to do, then it creates a spec, and based on this spec, and it really aligns with our document-driven culture, then you create your code. So it helps you from your prompt to a prototype, and then finally to production.
Yeah, it helps you think about your spec too,
Yes.
right? Because it's iterative, and you might say, no, that's not exactly what I want, and it's almost a conversation, which is really cool.
Yes.
I'm excited.
And the specs helps you then as well with your stakeholders. So
Right.
your colleagues in the business function, in QA, to talk about the actual piece of software. So it's not just a prompt and a piece of code, but it really takes naturally the software development process. And this is what I really like, how we innovated Cairo.
Yeah, really amazing things. I'm super optimistic about the future. So thank you for that conversation. And Matthias, really appreciate this conversation and this discussion about modernization. And I want to thank our audience for being with us today. If you want to learn more about these topics, please take a look at the AWS blogs. Also take a particular look at the AWS Enterprise Strategy blog, where you can double-click and deep dive on many other topics beyond modernization. So thanks so much, and we'll see you at the next episode.